On the verge of death, a businessman relies on the only person who has always been with him, his wife, until a beggar boy bursts into the room and shouts, "Don't take the medicine your wife is going to give you." The businessman trembles and his wife is in shock. Silence takes over the room. Watch until the end to see the outcome of this story. Alexander Morgan stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the bustling city below. His empire, Morgan Enterprises, stretched across 3 city blocks, a testament to 30 years of relentless dedication and innovation. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, deepening the lines of exhaustion that had become increasingly prominent over the past few months. He pressed his fingers against his temples, trying to ward off another wave of dizziness. These episodes had become more frequent lately, along with an unsettling brain fog that made even the simplest decisions feel like solving complex equations. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what. "Darling, you're working too hard again." The melodic voice of his wife, Victoria, floated through the office. She appeared in the doorway, elegant as always in her tailored burgundy suit, a glass of water in one hand and his evening medication in the other. Her presence had always been a source of comfort during their 15 years of marriage, but lately, something felt different. "The board meeting didn't go well?" she asked, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached. Her question was innocent enough, but there was an undertone he couldn't quite decipher. I can't remember parts of it," Alexander admitted, his voice carrying a hint of frustration. "There was something about the quarterly projections, but it's all fuzzy." He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, increasingly disturbed by these memory lapses. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand reached out, offering the pills. "That's why Dr. Harrison adjusted your medication, remember, to help with the stress-induced memory issues." Her smile was gentle, concerned, yet something in her eyes made Alexander hesitate for a fraction of a second before accepting the medication. As he raised the pills to his mouth, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Security guards were shouting, and the sound of running feet echoed through the corridor. Before either of them could react, a small figure burst through the door. A boy, no more than 12, wearing tattered clothes and sporting wild, desperate eyes. "Don't take those pills!" The boy screamed, his voice cracking with urgency. "She's not who you think she is." Victoria's face transformed for just a moment. A flash of something cold and dangerous crossed her features before the mask of concern slipped back into place. But Alexander had seen it, and in that instant, countless small details from the past few months suddenly demanded his attention. The security guards rushed in, grabbing the boy roughly. "We're so sorry, Mr. Morgan. This street kid somehow got past the lobby security. It won't happen again." "Wait," Alexander commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire. The guards froze, still holding the struggling boy. "Let him speak." Victoria stepped forward, her voice honey-sweet but with an edge that Alexander had never noticed before. "Darling, he's clearly disturbed. Let security handle this. You need to take your medicine and rest." The boy's eyes locked with Alexander's, and in them, he saw not the madness of a disturbed child, but a desperate clarity that sent chills down his spine. "The woman you married isn't real," the boy said, his voice quieter now but no less urgent. "Look at the company records from 3 months ago. Look at what happened to James in accounting. Look at—" "That's enough!" Victoria's voice cut through, the air like a whip. She turned to the guards. "Remove him now." As they dragged the boy away, his last words echoed through the office. "The truth is in the numbers, Mr. Morgan. The truth is in the numbers." Alexander stood frozen, the pills still in his hand, his mind racing despite the fog that seemed to perpetually cloud it these days. Victoria moved closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Don't let this upset you, darling. He's just a confused child looking for attention. Now take your medicine." But Alexander's gaze had drifted to his computer screen, where the quarterly financial reports still glowed. Something about the numbers, something he had noticed earlier but couldn't quite grasp. What had happened to James in accounting? He remembered vaguely that James had taken an unexpected leave of absence, but the details were frustratingly out of reach. He looked at his wife, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in months. Her expression was perfect, concerned, loving, patient, too perfect, like a masterfully crafted mask. And behind that mask, he caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold: calculation. The next morning, Sarah Chen sat at her desk in the financial analysis department, her fingers hovering over her keyboard, as she stared at the spreadsheet before her. As one of Morgan Enterprises' most talented analysts, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot patterns in numbers, and these numbers were screaming at her. She glanced around the office, making sure no one was watching, before pulling up the archived files from 3 months ago. The discrepancies were subtle, so subtle that anyone else might have missed. But Sarah had been tracking these anomalies for weeks now, building a digital trail that pointed to something deeply disturbing. The sound of heels clicking against marble made her quickly minimize the window. Victoria Morgan appeared around the corner, immaculately dressed as always, her presence commanding immediate attention from everyone in the office. Sarah kept her head down, pretending to focus on routine reports, but her peripheral vision tracked every movement of the CEO's wife. "Sarah, darling," Victoria's voice carried across the office space, "I hope you're not working too hard on a Saturday." She approached Sarah's desk with the fluid grace of a fashion model, but her eyes held the sharp focus of a predator. "Just catching up on some quarterly projections, Mrs. Morgan," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. Mr. Morgan requested them for Monday's meeting. Victoria's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ah, yes, the meeting, though I'm not sure Alexander will be up for it. His condition seems to be deteriorating." She paused, studying Sarah's face. "Such a shame, isn't it? The mighty falling victim to stress and age." Sarah forced herself to maintain eye contact, even as her instincts screamed at her to run. "I'm sorry to hear that. Mr. Morgan has always been such a strong leader." "Indeed." Victoria trailed her fingers along the edge of Sarah's desk, her red nails looking uncomfortably like drops of blood against the white surface. "But sometimes the strongest need to step aside, don't they? For their own good, of course." The threat in those words was clear, even if it was wrapped in silk. Sarah thought of the encrypted files hidden on her secure drive, the patterns she'd discovered, the mysterious disappearance of James from accounting after he'd mentioned certain irregularities in the company's offshore accounts. "Of course," Sarah echoed, her voice neutral. "Will you be taking a more active role in the company's management?" Victoria's smile widened fractionally. "Someone has to keep things running smoothly. Alexander trusts me completely, you know, as should everyone." "Else?" She leaned closer, her expensive perfume almost suffocating. "Loyalty is so important in a company this size, don't you agree?" Sarah nodded, maintaining her composed facade even as her mind raced. She thought of the encrypted email she'd sent to Mr. Morgan's private account just yesterday, detailing her findings. Had he seen it? Had he understood the implications before Victoria could intercept it? "Well, I'll let you get back to work." Victoria straightened, adjusting her designer jacket. "Oh, and Sarah, do be careful with those numbers. Sometimes people see patterns that aren't really there. It would be unfortunate if you jumped to the wrong conclusions." As Victoria walked away, Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her mouse. On her screen, the minimized window contained proof of systematic financial manipulation, all leading back to a series of offshore accounts. Accounts that had been set up under a name she recognized, Victoria's maiden name. But it wasn't just the financial irregularities that disturbed her. Sarah had also discovered something else: records of payments to a specialized pharmaceutical company, one that didn't appear on any official company documents. The same company that supplied Mr. Morgan's stress medication. A shadow fell across her desk, and Sarah looked up to find Mark from security standing there, his expression unreadable. "Miss Chen, could you come with me? There seems to be a problem with your security clearance." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, She glanced at her computer screen, then at her phone where she'd backed up all her findings. Had they discovered what she knew, or was this just another attempt to intimidate her into silence? As she stood to follow Mark, she caught a glimpse of Victoria watching from her office above, that same perfect smile fixed on her face. In that moment, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't wait any longer. It was time to find that street boy who had caused such a commotion yesterday, because somehow he knew something, and he might be the key to unraveling this whole conspiracy before it was too late. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of St. Mary's Shelter for Homeless Youth as Sarah Chen pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The smell of industrial cleaning, supplies and cafeteria food filled the air, mixing with the sounds of children's voices echoing from distant rooms. "I'm looking for a boy," Sarah explained to Sister Margaret, an elderly nun with kind eyes and weathered hands. "He would have been at Morgan Enterprises yesterday. Small for his age, maybe 12, dark hair." Sister Margaret's expression shifted subtly. "We have many children here, Miss Chen. Why are you looking for this particular one?" Sarah hesitated, weighing her words carefully. After her encounter with security, she'd managed to convince Mark that she'd simply been running routine audits, but she knew she was being watched. Her next moves had to be careful, calculated. "He might have information about some irregularities at the company," she said finally, keeping her voice low. "Information that could help Mr. Morgan." The nun studied her face for a long moment before nodding almost imperceptibly. "Follow me." They wound their way through narrow corridors, past rooms filled with bunk beds and shabby furniture. At the end of one hallway, Sister Margaret stopped outside a small library. "Wait here," she instructed, disappearing inside. Moments later, she returned with a boy, but not the one from yesterday. This boy was older, maybe 15, with sharp features and suspicious eyes. "This is Michael," Sister Margaret said. "He might be able to help you." Sarah felt her hope deflating, but before she could protest, Michael spoke. "You're looking for Tommy." His voice was quiet but firm. "He's my brother, and he's in hiding." Understanding dawned on Sarah. "The boy who warned Mr. Morgan, that was Tommy." Michael nodded, glancing around before continuing. "Tommy's been watching Mrs. Morgan for weeks. Michael paused, choosing his words carefully. "He has a talent for going unnoticed, for getting into places where he's not supposed to be." Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. "What has he seen?" "Meetings. Late at night at the company, Mrs. Morgan with some man from the financial department. Tommy couldn't hear everything, but..." Michael's eyes darted to Sister Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. "He saw them replacing bottles in some kind of medical storage room, and he heard them talking about making Mr. Morgan compliant." Sarah's heart raced. This confirmed her suspicions about the pharmaceutical payments she'd discovered. "I need to talk to Tommy," she insisted. "I have evidence, financial records that could prove what's happening, but I need his testimony to connect everything." Michael shook his head. "Tommy won't come out of hiding, not after what happened to the last person who tried to expose them." "James from accounting," Sarah whispered. "What happened to him?" "Tommy saw them threatening him. Said they had pictures of his family, evidence of fake transactions they'd planted in his name. They gave him a choice: take a permanent vacation or face the consequences. He left the next day." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She pulled out her phone, showing Michael the encrypted files she'd gathered. "Look at these transactions, the offshore accounts, the pharmaceutical company payments. With Tommy's testimony, we could..." The library door burst open. Sarah quickly pocketed her phone as a volunteer rushed in. "Sister Margaret, there's a situation in the cafeteria that needs your attention." The nun hurried out, leaving Sarah with Michael. The boy's expression had grown even more serious. "Tonight," he whispered urgently, "behind the old warehouse on Pine Street, midnight. Tommy will be there." He pressed a folded paper into her hand. "But be careful, they're watching you." Sarah slipped the paper into her pocket, just as Sister Margaret returned. She thanked them both and left quickly, her mind already racing with plans for tonight's meeting. What she didn't notice was the black sedan parked across the street from the shelter, or the man inside speaking quietly into a phone. "She's just left the shelter. Should we follow?" Victoria Morgan's voice came through clearly. "No, let her go. She'll lead us right to the boy," and then there was a pause, followed by a cold laugh. "Then we'll tie up all our loose ends at once." Back at Morgan Enterprises, Alexander sat in his office, staring at the untouched glass of water and pills on his desk. The boy's warning echoed in his mind, becoming clearer as the fog of medication from the previous days began to lift. He reached for his computer, determined to dig deeper into the company records despite his persistent headache. A notification popped up, an encrypted email from Sarah Chen. His finger hovered over the mouse, but before he could open it, Victoria swept into the office. "Darling, you haven't taken your medicine," she observed, her tone carrying an edge beneath its concern. "You know what Dr. Harrison said about keeping to the schedule." Alexander looked at his wife, noting how her hand twitched slightly when he didn't immediately reach for the pills. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "perhaps we should get a second opinion about my condition." Victoria's smile remained fixed, but something dangerous flashed in her eyes. "Of course, if that would make you feel better. But for now," she pushed the glass closer. "Take your medicine, dear. You know how confused you get without it." Alexander picked up the glass, acutely aware of Victoria's intense gaze. The boy's warning rang in his ears. "Don't take those pills." But as he raised the glass to his lips, he had no way of knowing that across town, Sarah Chen was walking into a trap that could unravel everything or seal his fate forever. The old warehouse on Pine Street loomed against the midnight sky, its abandoned windows staring down at Sarah like empty eyes. She checked her phone again, 11:55 p.m. The encrypted files she'd gathered felt like they were burning a hole in her pocket, each piece of evidence a potential key to unraveling Victoria's web of deception. A sudden movement in the shadows made her freeze. "Tommy?" she whispered into the darkness. No response. The sound of footsteps echoed off the warehouse walls, but she couldn't pinpoint their direction. Sarah's heart pounded as she remembered Michael's warning. "They're watching you." "Over." "Here?" a young voice called softly from behind a dumpster. Sarah moved cautiously toward it, her hand clutching her phone. As she rounded the corner, she found not Tommy but Michael, his face pale in the dim streetlight. "Where's Tommy?" she demanded, immediately sensing something was wrong. "I'm sorry," Michael's voice cracked. "They have him. They caught him this afternoon, and they said if I didn't help them." Before Sarah could react, car headlights blazed to life around the warehouse, surrounding them. Doors slammed and figures emerged from the darkness. "Ms. Chen," a familiar voice called out. Mark from security stepped into the light, flanked by two other men she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Morgan would like to have a word with you." Sarah's mind raced. She needed to get her evidence to Alexander Morgan, and she needed to do it now. In one fluid motion, she pulled out her phone and pressed send on a pre-prepared email, one she'd set up as a failsafe. Mark lunged forward, but he was too late. "Message sent," Sarah announced, her voice steady despite her fear. "To every major financial newspaper in the country. Everything I've found, the offshore accounts, the pharmaceutical records, all of it, it's out there now." A slow clapping sound echoed through the warehouse yard. Victoria Morgan stepped into the light, her designer heels clicking against the concrete. "Impressive, Miss Chen, very impressive. But did you really think I wouldn't be prepared for something like this?" She pulled out her own phone, showing Sarah a screen filled with code. "A quite sophisticated virus, courtesy of our IT department. The moment your email hit the servers, it was intercepted and destroyed, along with every backup you so carefully created." Sarah's confidence wavered, but she forced herself to stand tall. "There are other copies." "Oh, like the ones on your home computer? The external drive hidden in your desk, the cloud storage account?" Victoria's smile was triumphant. "We've been watching you for weeks, Sarah. Did you really think we'd let you get this far if we weren't in control of every move?" Michael stood trembling beside Sarah, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "They said they'd hurt Tommy if I didn't help them." Victoria turned her cold smile to the boy. "And you played your part perfectly, dear. Tommy is safe in for now, though his future depends entirely on how cooperative everyone continues to be." Sarah's mind raced through her options. There was one piece of evidence she hadn't stored digitally, one connection they couldn't know about. The paper trail leading to Dr. Harrison, the physician who'd been prescribing Alexander's medication. She'd hidden those documents in the one place Victoria would never think to look. "What now?" Sarah asked, playing for time. "You make me disappear like James from accounting?" Victoria laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls. "Oh no, dear. You're far too valuable for that. You see, we need someone to take the fall when this all comes out. Someone who's been obsessively tracking financial records, creating false documents, trying to frame an innocent woman." She gestured to Mark. "Show her." Mark held up a laptop, displaying what appeared to be Sarah's workstation, except the numbers were all wrong, twisted versions of her original findings that painted a very different picture. "By morning, every transaction you've been tracking will lead back to accounts in your name," Victoria explained. "A disgruntled employee trying to embezzle funds and blame it on her boss's wife. How tragic." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the depth of Victoria's manipulation. But there was something the woman hadn't considered. Something about Tommy's original warning to Alexander that didn't fit into her perfect narrative. At that moment, a distant siren wailed, drawing closer. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment before returning. "That would be your police escort arriving. Ready to face your new reality, Ms. Chen." But Sarah stood straighter, a slight smile playing at her lips. Because in that brief moment, say of distraction, she'd seen something Victoria hadn't. A small figure moving in the shadows of the warehouse's upper windows. Tommy wasn't as captive as his brother had been led to believe. And if she could keep Victoria's attention just a little longer, maybe, just maybe, the real evidence would make it into the right hands. After all, Alexander Morgan wasn't the only one who'd received an encrypted email that day. Sometimes the best place to hide the truth was in plain sight, like in the drafts folder of the company's own email server, waiting to be discovered by someone who knew exactly where to look. Alexander Morgan stood in his private bathroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His normally sharp blue eyes were clouded, but clearer than they'd been in weeks. 3 days had passed since he'd started secretly disposing of his medication, and though the withdrawal symptoms were uncomfortable, his mind was finally beginning to emerge from the fog. He splashed cold water on his face, careful to maintain the appearance of someone still under the influence of the drugs. Victoria's surveillance was everywhere, in the concerned looks of the staff she'd hired, in the cameras that had mysteriously appeared in the name of security, in the constant presence of her new personal assistant, who seemed to shadow his every move. A gentle knock at the door made him quickly grab the glass of water and pills he'd hidden earlier. "Just a moment," he called, making a show of swallowing the medication as Victoria entered. In reality, the pills disappeared into a hidden pocket he'd sewn into his sleeve. "The board is waiting, darling," Victoria said, adjusting his tie with practiced care. "Are you sure you're up for this meeting?" "Of course," he replied, letting a slight slur enter his voice, "though perhaps you should lead the discussion about the new offshore investments." A flash of satisfaction crossed Victoria's face. "If you think that's best, you know I only want to help." As they walked to the boardroom, Alexander's mind was racing beneath his manufactured days. The pieces were starting to come together. The mysterious email from Sarah Chen that had disappeared from his inbox, the sudden changes in security personnel, the way certain board members now deferred to Victoria instead of him. The boardroom was full when they arrived, but one absence was glaring. "Where's Sarah Chen?" Alexander asked, carefully gauging the reactions around the table. "I thought we needed her financial projections for this meeting." "Oh, haven't you heard?" Victoria's voice was perfectly modulated to convey concern. "She's taken an indefinite leave of absence, something about personal issues. The police were involved, I believe." Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Robert Hayes, the head of legal, caught Alexander's eye for a brief moment before quickly looking away. There was something there, fear, guilt. Alexander filed it away for later consideration. Now, Victoria took control of the meeting with practiced ease. About those offshore investments, Alexander appeared to drift in and out of attention, playing the role of the declining executive, while his mind catalogued every detail. The way Victoria emphasized certain points, the subtle nods between her and specific board members, the unusual terminology that had crept into company documents over the past few months. Halfway through the meeting, his assistant entered discreetly and placed a note in front of him. The message was simple. Dr. Harrison called. Your test results are ready. Victoria reached for the note, but Alexander managed to slide it into his pocket first. Medical privacy, dear, he said with a slight smile. You know how doctors are. For just a moment, Victoria's mask slipped. The look she gave him was calculating, almost predatory, but then it was gone, replaced by her usual concerned smile. Of course, darling. Shall I have Charles drive you to the appointment? No need. Alexander waved off the offer. I'll have my regular driver take me. Better not to interrupt the meeting for something so routine. As the presentation continued, Alexander noticed something odd about the financial charts being displayed. There was a pattern in the numbers that seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. He pulled out his phone, pretending to check emails while actually taking discreet photos of the slides. The meeting concluded with Victoria having successfully pushed through several key proposals. As the board members filed out, Alexander lingered, apparently struggling with his papers, but actually watching the interactions between certain executives. Mr. Morgan, a young intern, approached hesitantly. There's someone waiting for you in your office. A Sister Margaret from St. Mary's Shelter? Victoria, who had been conversing with Robert Hayes in the corner, suddenly turned. A nun? What business could she have here? Charity donation, probably, Alexander mumbled, playing up his confusion. You know how many organizations we support. I'll handle it, Victoria offered smoothly. You should rest before your doctor's appointment. No, Alexander said firmly, surprising even himself with the strength in his voice. Some things still require the personal touch of the CEO. As he walked to his office, he could feel Victoria's eyes boring into his back. She would send someone to monitor the meeting, of course, but that was exactly what he was counting on, because Sister Margaret wasn't just any nun. She was the one person who might know where to find Sarah Chen's missing evidence. What Victoria didn't know was that Alexander had his own surveillance in place. Years of building an empire had taught him to plan for every contingency, including the betrayal of those closest to him. And right now, in a secure server accessible only through his private terminal, a program was running that would reveal every digital footprint his wife had left over the past 6 months. The question was, could he get to the truth before Victoria realized just how much of his confusion had been an act? And more importantly, could he protect those who had risked everything to help him, including a mysterious street boy whose warning had started this all? As he reached for his office door, he heard the distinct sound of a security radio crackling to life behind him. The game was entering its final phase, and the next few hours would determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone involved in this dangerous web of deception. Sister Margaret sat in Alexander Morgan's office, her weathered hands folded calmly in her lap, but her eyes were sharp and alert. Behind her, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled out like a circuit board, each light a potential ally or enemy in the growing conspiracy. Miss Chen left something in my care, she said quietly, aware of the security guard positioned just outside the door. She said you would know what to do with it when the time was right. Alexander leaned forward, maintaining the slight tremor in his hands that everyone had come to expect. And how would I know when that time has come? The elderly nun smiled, reaching into her bag to withdraw what appeared to be a prayer book. She said you would know when you started asking the right questions. She placed the book on his desk, opening it to reveal a hollow center containing a small USB drive. Like why a certain pharmaceutical company that doesn't exist keeps appearing in your company's records. Alexander's eyes widened slightly, but he maintained his facade of confusion. "Sister, I'm not sure I follow." "Tommy told me everything," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the meetings he witnessed, the conversations he overheard. The boy has a gift for being invisible when he needs to be, just like his mother had, before she disappeared while investigating corporate fraud at her own company 3 years ago." The implication hit Alexander like a physical blow. Could it be coincidence that Tommy's apparent random warning had been so specific, so timely? Or was there a deeper connection he had yet to discover? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Victoria entered, her smile pristine but her eyes calculating as they took in the scene. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all." Sister Margaret rose smoothly, leaving the prayer book on Alexander's desk. "I was just discussing our annual charity gala. Mr. Morgan has always been so generous to our shelter." Victoria's gaze fixed on the book. "How wonderful. Though perhaps we should postpone any decisions until after Alexander's doctor's appointment. He's been so forgetful lately." "Of course," the nun agreed, moving toward the door. But she paused, turning back to Alexander. "Oh, and Mr. Morgan. Tommy asked me to tell you something. He said the truth isn't just in the numbers, it's in the gaps between them." Victoria's perfectly manicured hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the doorframe. What an odd thing for a child to say. Sister Margaret met her gaze without flinching. "Children often see things adults miss. Their minds aren't clouded by their medication." After the nun left, Victoria moved to pick up the prayer book, but Alexander was faster, sliding it into his desk drawer. "I'll look at it later, dear. Wouldn't want to be late for Dr. Harrison." About that, Victoria's voice took on a honeyed tone that Alexander had come to recognize as dangerous. "I took the liberty of rescheduling your appointment. Dr. Harrison had an emergency." "Did he?" Alexander fought to keep his voice neutral. "That's unfortunate. I was looking forward to discussing my progress." Victoria perched on the edge of his desk, her expression concerned but her eyes watchful. "You seem different today, darling. More alert. Are you sure you've been taking your medication properly?" "Of course," he replied, fighting the urge to recoil as she reached out to stroke his cheek. "Though sometimes I wonder about James from accounting, and now Sarah Chen, such sudden departures." "You're getting paranoid again," Victoria sighed, reaching into her purse. "Here, take another pill. Dr. Harrison said we could increase the dosage if needed." Alexander stared at the pill in her hand, remembering Tommy's desperate warning. Behind Victoria, he caught a glimpse of movement, a small face at the window of the building across the street, quickly disappearing. "You're right," he said, taking the pill but not swallowing it yet. "I'm probably just confused. Like you said, these gaps in my memory." Victoria stood, satisfied. "Rest now, darling. I'll handle everything." As she left the office, Alexander palmed the pill into his pocket, his mind racing. The USB drive hidden. In the prayer book, Tommy's cryptic message about the gaps in the numbers, Sister Margaret's revelation about the boy's mother. Pieces of a puzzle were coming together. But he needed time to access his private terminal, to run the surveillance program he'd secretly installed. What he didn't know was that 17 floors below, in the building's security center, Victoria was already making a phone call. He's becoming suspicious. Accelerate the timeline and find that nun. She knows too much. The game was reaching its climax, and Alexander had only hours to uncover the truth before Victoria's endgame played out. The question was, could he protect everyone involved while exposing the conspiracy, or would more innocent people disappear into the gaps between the numbers? In the dimly lit server room of Morgan Enterprises, Robert Hayes nervously glanced over his shoulder as his fingers flew across the keyboard. As head of legal, he had access to files that even Victoria didn't know existed, including the encrypted backups that Alexander had insisted on implementing years ago. The weight of his guilt had become unbearable. He had watched silently as Victoria's influence grew, as loyal employees mysteriously disappeared, as Alexander's sharp mind dulled under the influence of suspicious medications. But Sarah Chen's sudden leave of absence had been the final straw. Come on, he muttered, searching through the digital archives. 3 months of security footage, encrypted email exchanges and financial records began copying to the secure drive, evidence that could expose everything if he could get it to Alexander in time. A notification popped up on his screen. Unauthorized access detected. Robert's heart nearly stopped. He quickly initiated the deletion protocol, but not before sending one final encrypted message to Alexander's private server. Check the phantom server. Follow the breadcrumbs. RH. The door to the server room burst open. Mark from security entered, flanked by 2 unfamiliar men in dark suits. Mr. Hayes. Mark's voice was cold. Mrs. Morgan would like to speak with you. Upstairs in his office, Alexander Morgan was examining the USB drive Sister Margaret had delivered. His private terminal hummed quietly as it ran the surveillance program he'd secretly installed months ago, before Victoria's manipulation had begun, when his instincts first warned him that something wasn't right. The drive contained hundreds of files, meticulously organized by Sarah Chen, financial records, email exchanges, pharmaceutical orders, all pointing to a massive conspiracy. But it was a single video file that caught his attention, security footage from the company's private medical facility. The timestamp showed 3 months ago. Victoria entered the facility after hours, accompanied by a man Alexander recognized as Dr. Harrison's assistant. They accessed the medication storage room, and the assistant began systematically replacing bottles while Victoria supervised. A movement in the corner of the frame made Alexander lean closer. There, barely visible in the shadows, was a small figure, Tommy, witnessing everything. Suddenly, his computer chimed. A new message had appeared in his. Secure inbox. Check the phantom server. Follow the breadcrumbs. RH. Alexander's pulse quickened. The phantom server was a secret backup system he'd established years ago, known only to him and a handful of trusted executives. If Robert Hayes was directing him there, a knock at his door made him quickly pocket the USB drive and close the Khan video. Victoria entered, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Darling, have you seen Robert Hayes? He seems to have left rather suddenly. No, Alexander replied, careful to maintain his slightly confused demeanor. Perhaps he had a family emergency. Victoria's smile tightened. Perhaps, though, people seem to be having a lot of emergencies lately, don't they? First James, then Sarah, now Robert. She moved closer, placing a hand on his desk. You're looking quite alert, Alexander. Those new pills must be working well. Thanks to your careful attention, he replied, forcing himself not to recoil from her touch. Though I was thinking about the offshore accounts. You don't need to worry about those, Victoria cut in smoothly. I have everything under control. In fact, she reached into her purse, I think it's time for your medication. Before she could withdraw the pills, her phone buzzed. As she checked it, her expression darkened momentarily before smoothing back into its perfect mask. Excuse me, darling. A small situation requires my attention. She headed for the door but paused. Don't forget your medicine. I'll have Sarah, my new assistant, bring it shortly. After she left, Alexander waited exactly 3 minutes before accessing the phantom server. Robert's message had included an encryption key that unlocked a hidden directory. Inside, he found what he was looking for. Proof of Victoria's systematic takeover of his company, including recordings of her meetings with various board members where she threatened them with manufactured evidence of financial misconduct. But it was the last file that made his blood run cold. A police report from 3 years ago detailing the disappearance of a corporate whistleblower, Catherine Sullivan. The report included a photo of her young son, Tommy. The pieces clicked into place. Tommy's warning hadn't been random. The boy had been watching Victoria because he suspected she was connected to his mother's disappearance, and now both Tommy and Robert Hayes were in danger. Alexander's computer chimed again. The new message, this time from an anonymous sender. Meet me at St. Mary's, midnight. Bring the evidence. They're moving tonight. T. He checked his watch. 3 hours until midnight. 3 hours to outmaneuver the woman who had nearly destroyed him. 3 hours to save everyone involved in this conspiracy. But first, he had to survive Victoria's next move, because if there was one thing he'd learned over the past 3 months, it was that his wife always had a contingency plan. And as if on cue, he heard the click of heels approaching his office, too heavy to be Victoria's. The new assistant was coming with his medication, and this time he suspected it would be a dose he wasn't meant to survive. Sarah Chen huddled in the basement of St. Mary's shelter, surrounded by stacks of forgotten donations and the quiet hum of ancient heating pipes. Her arrest had been a carefully orchestrated deception, a plan set in motion the moment she'd realized the depth of Victoria's surveillance. Sister Margaret had hidden her here for the past 3 days, while Tommy served as her eyes and ears in the outside world. The boy's ability to move undetected through the city had proven invaluable, especially after Robert Hayes had made contact. "They're moving faster than we expected," Tommy reported, slipping through the basement's hidden entrance. His small face was tight with worry. "Mrs. Morgan's men took Mr. Hayes away an hour ago." Sarah clutched the burner phone she'd been using to monitor the situation. "Did he manage to access the phantom server?" Tommy nodded. "And Mr. Morgan got the message, but..." He hesitated. "Victoria's ordered something new from the pharmaceutical company. A final dose, they called it." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. "We have to warn him." "Already did." Tommy's eyes held a wisdom far beyond his years. "Sent an anonymous message from the library computer. He'll meet us here at midnight." "If he survives that long," Sarah muttered, turning to her laptop where she'd been analyzing the data Robert had managed to send. The evidence was damning, not just of Victoria's takeover attempt, but of a pattern of corporate infiltration going back years, including, Sarah strongly suspected, the company where Tommy's mother had worked. "Someone's coming," Tommy suddenly whispered, pressing himself against the wall near the hidden entrance. Heavy footsteps echoed from above, followed by voices. "Search everything," a familiar voice ordered. "Mark from security. Mrs. Morgan wants them found before midnight." Sarah quickly closed her laptop, gathering their evidence into a waterproof bag. They had prepared for this possibility, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Alexander would be walking into a trap if he came here now. "Tommy," she whispered, "Plan B, can you do it?" The boy's face set with determination. "Like we practiced." He took a small envelope from Sarah, a copy of their most crucial evidence, and disappeared into a ventilation shaft that only someone his size could navigate. Above them, the footsteps grew closer. Sarah pulled out her final insurance policy, a small recording device that had captured every conversation in Victoria's office for the past month, courtesy of a maintenance worker who owed Sister Margaret a favor. The basement door crashed open. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. "Ms. Chen," Mark's voice carried down the stairs, "let's make this easy on everyone." Sarah pressed herself against the wall, her mind racing. They couldn't find the evidence. Everything they'd gathered about Victoria's crimes, about the disappeared employees, about Tommy's mother. But more importantly, they couldn't stop Tommy from reaching Alexander. A crashing sound from the opposite end of the basement drew the flashlight beams away from her position. Tommy's distraction, right on cue. The boy had learned well from his time on the streets. Sarah used the moment to slip behind a large storage cabinet, pressing a hidden panel that revealed a narrow passage, one of the shelter's many secrets, from its days as part of the Underground Railroad. As she closed the panel behind her, she heard Mark's frustrated shout, but she couldn't waste time savoring their confusion. Alexander would be leaving his office soon, heading into what he thought was a simple meeting. Victoria's final dose was surely already prepared. Everything hinged on the next few hours. Sarah made her way through the narrow tunnel, emerging 2 blocks away in the basement of an abandoned church. Her burner phone buzzed, a message from Sister Margaret. "They're watching all the usual routes, but he found another way." Sarah smiled grimly. Even Victoria, with all her surveillance and planning, had underestimated Tommy's resourcefulness. The boy who had once been invisible to society had become their most vital asset. She checked the time, 10:45 p.m., just over an hour until midnight. An hour to get their evidence to the right people, to save Alexander Morgan, to expose Victoria's crimes and maybe, just maybe, to finally uncover the truth about what had happened to Tommy's mother. But first, she had to reach the one person who could help them broadcast the truth to the world, and he was currently sitting in the Morgan Enterprises parking garage, unaware that his next broadcast could bring down one of the city's most powerful couples. Sarah pulled out a second burner phone, dialing a number she'd memorized years ago. When the voice on the other end answered, she spoke quickly. "Jack, it's Sarah Chen. Remember that favor you owe me? I need you to break the biggest story of your career, but we have to move fast. Lives depend on it." The veteran reporter's response was immediate. Where and when? Sarah looked at her watch again, calculating the risks. "Bring your camera crew to St. Mary's at midnight, and Jack, make sure you're broadcasting live. What's coming can't be buried or edited away." She ended the call, knowing Victoria's surveillance would be tracking any unusual media movements, but that was part of the plan. Sometimes the best place to hide was in plain sight. The game wasn't just about saving Alexander anymore. It was about exposing a truth that had claimed too many victims already. And as Sarah Chen stepped out into the night, she knew that by midnight, everyone's carefully constructed masks would finally fall away. Victoria Morgan stood at the window of her private office, watching the city lights flicker like stars beneath her. On her desk, a small vial containing a clear liquid caught the reflection of her computer screen, where multiple surveillance feeds played silently. "Everything is in position," Mark reported from the doorway. "Our teams are surrounding St. Mary's, and we have eyes on all possible approach routes." Victoria didn't turn from the window. "And Robert Hayes?" "Secure, though he's refusing to reveal where he sent the backup files." Now she did turn, her perfectly composed face betraying just a hint of irritation. "He'll talk. They all do eventually." She picked up the vial, holding it to the light. "Did you deliver the special medication to Alexander's new assistant?" "Yes, ma'am. She's waiting for your signal." Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Excellent. And the media presence?" Channel 8 news van was spotted heading towards St. Mary's. "We could intercept." "No," Victoria cut him off. "Let them come. In fact," she paused, considering, "contact our friends at the station. Tell them they might want to send additional crews. This could be a very newsworthy night." Mark hesitated. "Ma'am?" "The best way to bury a story, Mark, is to control how it's told." She moved to her desk, pulling up a file on her computer. "By morning, the media will be reporting on the tragic mental breakdown of Alexander Morgan, who, in his paranoid state, accused his loving wife of conspiracy. Fortunately, his devoted board of directors had already voted to transfer control of the company to me, foreseeing his deteriorating condition. And Sarah Chen, a disgruntled employee who took advantage of his weakness, manipulating him with false evidence. Such a shame about her accident while fleeing police custody." Victoria's voice was casual, as if discussing the weather. "The same fate that befell Catherine Sullivan 3 years ago when she tried to expose our previous acquisition." "The boy could still be a problem," Mark warned. "He's proven difficult to catch." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "A street urchin telling wild tales. Who would believe him over the grieving widow of one of the city's most respected businessmen?" She checked her watch. "Speaking of which, it's time for Alexander's final dose. Signal the assistant." As Mark left to make the call, Victoria returned to the window. Everything was falling into place. 3 years of careful planning, of building her network, of positioning herself within Morgan Enterprises, all leading to this night. Alexander had been her most ambitious target yet, but then he'd always underestimated her, just like Catherine Sullivan had underestimated her at the last company. Her phone buzzed, a text from her pharmaceutical contact. "Production line dismantled, all traces eliminated." Perfect. The evidence of their specialized medication production would be gone before anyone could investigate. Though she had to admit, she would miss the elegance of their solution, a carefully calibrated combination of drugs that slowly clouded the mind while leaving the victim appearing functional enough to sign whatever documents were placed before them. Another buzz, this one from her private security team. Subject Chen spotted near west entrance of St. Mary's. Victoria's smile widened. So predictable. Sarah Chen thought she was so clever, arranging this midnight meeting, but she had played right into Victoria's hands. Let them all gather at St. Mary's. Alexander, Sarah, the media, even that meddlesome street boy. By sunrise, every loose end would be neatly tied up. She picked up her phone, dialing a familiar number. Dr. Harrison, is everything prepared? At the clinic? She listened for a moment, satisfaction spreading across her face. Excellent. Make sure the paperwork reflects his declining mental state over the past few months. Yes, including paranoid delusions about his wife. Ending the call, Victoria opened her wall safe and removed a thick folder, her contingency plan. Inside were documents dating back 3 years, carefully crafted evidence showing Alexander's gradual descent into paranoia. Medical records, security reports, concerned emails from board members, all fabricated, all perfect. A final message flashed on her screen. Assistant entering Alexander's office now. Victoria moved to her coat rack, selecting a designer jacket perfect for television appearances. After all, she would need to look appropriately distraught when she appeared on the morning news, discussing her husband's tragic breakdown. But, as she adjusted her collar in the mirror, she failed to notice a small red light blinking beneath her desk. A recording device capturing every word, every plan, every confession. Because even the most careful predators eventually make mistakes, and Victoria's mistake had been underestimating just how many allies Sarah Chen had gathered within the company walls. The clock struck 11:30 p.m. In Alexander's office, his new assistant approached with a glass of water and what was intended to be his final dose. At St. Mary's, Sarah Chen and Tommy moved their pieces into position, and somewhere in between, a small army of truth-seekers prepared to expose a conspiracy 3 years in the making. The endgame had begun. Alexander Morgan sat at his desk, watching the new assistant approach with what she thought was his final dose. Claire, Victoria had called her, though he suspected that wasn't her real name. She moved with the practiced grace of someone with combat training poorly disguised. Beneath civilian clothes. "Your medication, Mr. Morgan," she said, placing the glass of water and pills before him. Her tone was solicitous, but her eyes were cold, professional. "Thank you, Claire," he replied, maintaining his facade of confusion. "Such a help you've been, especially since Sarah left." He picked up the glass, noting how she shifted slightly, positioning herself to prevent any sudden movements on his part. The pills sat innocently on his desk, looking identical to his regular medication, but he knew what they really were. Victoria had gotten careless in her confidence, leaving the pharmaceutical orders visible on her computer during one of his confused wanderings into her office. "Mrs. Morgan asked me to make sure you take them," Claire said, her hand drifting toward her jacket pocket, "for your own good." Alexander smiled vaguely. "Of course. Victoria always knows best." He raised the glass to his lips, using the movement to obscure his other hand as it pressed a button under his desk, a silent signal to security personnel still loyal to him. Claire watched intently as he appeared to swallow the pills, her posture relaxing slightly when he set down the empty glass. The pills were actually secured in a hidden compartment in his sleeve, a trick Tommy had taught him during one of their secret meetings. "Very good, Mr. Morgan," Claire said, checking her watch. "Would you like me to help you to the couch? A medication usually makes you quite drowsy." "Actually," Alexander's voice suddenly cleared, losing its confused tremor, "I think we should discuss your real employer and what happened to Catherine Sullivan 3 years ago." Claire's expression didn't change, but her hand moved decisively toward her pocket. Before she could reach whatever was hidden there, the office door opened. 2 security guards, ones Alexander had personally vetted, entered silently. Please, keep your hands where we can see them, Miss Reyes, one of them said. Or should we call you by your mercenary code name? Now Claire's composure did crack, if only slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just Mr. Morgan's assistant. You're the same assistant who was present during Catherine Sullivan's. It's an unfortunate accident, Alexander said, standing. Though you were using a different name then, Victoria does like to recycle her best assets. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Claire's face. How did you... know? Alexander smiled. Let's just say a certain street boy isn't the only one who knows how to gather intelligence. He nodded to the guards. Take her to the secure room and make sure she's watched by personnel who don't report to Victoria. As Claire was led away, Alexander checked his watch. 11:45 p.m. Time to move. He gathered the USB drive from Sister Margaret, the files from the Phantom server, and the recording device that had been capturing Victoria's every word in her office. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. All pieces in place. Media arriving at St. Mary's, V took the bait. Perfect. Victoria thought she was orchestrating an elaborate trap, but she had no idea she was walking into one herself. The evidence of her crimes wasn't just backed up, it was distributed across multiple secure locations, ready to be released simultaneously. Alexander opened his desk drawer, removing a final piece of evidence, a handwritten journal belonging to Catherine Sullivan, recovered from a safety deposit box by Tommy weeks ago. Its pages detailed the exact same pattern: the suspicious medications, the gradual corporate takeover, the orchestrated accidents. His computer chimed with an incoming email from Robert Hayes' secure account. Package delivered to all major networks. Time delayed release set for midnight. Another buzz from his phone, Sarah Chen this time. Tommy confirms V's security teams in position around St. Mary's, proceeding with Plan A. Alexander straightened his tie, checking his reflection in the window. The confused, weakened man Victoria thought she had created was gone. In his place stood the sharp, strategic businessman who had built Morgan Enterprises from the ground up. A final message arrived from Sister Margaret. God's house offers many paths to redemption. The old tunnel entrance awaits. He smiled. Victoria's teams might be surrounding St. Mary's, but they were watching the wrong entrance. The century-old tunnel system that had once saved countless lives would serve that purpose once again. As he prepared to leave his office for what might be the last time, Alexander paused at his desk. Taking out a pen, he wrote a short note and placed it where Victoria would easily find it. You taught me an important lesson, dear. Always have a contingency plan. The clock struck 11:50 p.m. In 10 minutes, the truth about Victoria Morgan's criminal empire would be exposed to the world. But first, Alexander had a midnight meeting to attend and a 3-year-old mystery to finally solve. He touched the small photo of Tommy and Catherine Sullivan in his pocket. Some debts could never be repaid, but justice could still be served. And tonight, the predator would finally become the prey. The ancient tunnels beneath St. Mary's echoed with whispered conversations and careful footsteps as Sarah Chen led a small group through the darkness. Behind her, Tommy moved with the confidence of someone who had mapped every inch of these passages. Sister Margaret followed, accompanied by Jack Thompson from Channel 8 News and his most trusted camera operator. Remember, Sarah whispered, once we start broadcasting, we can't stop. No matter what happens. Jack nodded grimly, adjusting his lightweight camera equipment. My team has backup generators positioned around the building. Even if they cut the power, we stay live. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, one of many that had sheltered refugees over the centuries. Modern technology had been carefully integrated into the historic space. Laptops connected to secure networks, backup drives containing multiple copies of their evidence, and a sophisticated broadcasting setup that would bypass any attempt at signal interference. Victoria's teams are all focused on the main building, Tommy reported, returning from one of his scouting missions through the ventilation system. She's here personally, coordinating from the shelter's office. Sarah checked her watch, 11:55 p.m. Any sign of Alexander? He's coming through the east tunnel. already avoided 3 of her security checkpoints. Tommy's eyes gleamed with admiration. He's good at this. Sister Margaret touched Sarah's arm. Robert Hayes is secure? In protective custody with federal agents, Sarah confirmed. Victoria's people won't find him. She turned to the small group of loyal Morgan Enterprises employees who had joined their cause. Everyone knows their roles. They nodded. Each had been chosen carefully, people who had noticed the irregularities in the company, who had suspected something was wrong but hadn't known who to trust. Now they were positioned throughout the building, ready to ensure that every exit remained accessible, every piece of evidence protected. Signal from the north entrance, one of them reported. Through a secure radio. Victoria's bringing in more security. They're carrying something. Medical equipment? Sarah's blood ran cold. She's not just planning to silence Alexander, she's going to make it look like a complete breakdown. The media's here to witness her desperate attempt to help her troubled husband. Not if we move. First, a familiar voice said from the tunnel entrance. Alexander Morgan stepped into the chamber, looking nothing like the confused man Victoria thought she had created. His eyes were clear, his posture straight, every movement precise and purposeful. Mr. Morgan, Sarah stepped forward. We have everything in place. The evidence is already spreading, he finished, holding up his phone. Robert's package is being delivered to news outlets across the country. In 5 minutes, Victoria's entire network will be exposed. She'll have contingencies, Jack warned. People ready to discredit the evidence, spin the story. That's why we're not just relying on documents, Alexander said, turning to Tommy. Tell them what you found. The boy pulled a small notebook from his jacket, newer than Catherine Sullivan's journal, but equally damning. Victoria keeps a personal record of everything. Every plan, every victim, every detail of how she takes over companies. I've been watching her write in it for weeks from the air vents in her office. Sarah's eyes widened. You got it? Tommy smiled. Switched it with an exact copy last night. She won't notice the difference until it's too late. Suddenly, the radios crackled. Movement at all entrances. They're preparing to sweep the building. Alexander checked his watch. 11:58 p.m. Victoria thinks she's choreographing her husband's tragic breakdown in front of the media. Instead, she's about to star in her own exposé. He turned to Jack. Your camera's ready. The reporter nodded, his expression grim but determined. Live feed starts in 2 minutes. Every major network is standing by to pick up our signal. Tommy? Alexander knelt before the boy. You don't have to be part of this next part. You've done more than enough. But Tommy stood straighter, his young face set with determination. My mom tried to stop her, now I'm going to finish what she started. Above them, footsteps echoed through the old building as Victoria's teams moved into position. The clock ticked toward midnight as Sarah distributed earpieces to everyone, connecting them to their network of allies throughout the shelter. Remember, she said, Victoria thinks she's orchestrating an ending, but this is just the beginning. The first camera light turned on, illuminating the ancient chamber. In 2 minutes, the truth about Victoria Morgan would be broadcast to the world. But first, they had to survive. What promised to be the longest and most dangerous midnight hour of their lives. Alexander touched the evidence in his pocket, Victoria's notebook, Catherine's journal, and the proof of every crime his wife had committed. Let's give the media something worth broadcasting. The clock struck midnight, and somewhere above them, Victoria Morgan smiled as she prepared to spring her trap, unaware that she was about to become the architect of her own downfall. Victoria. Morgan strode through the main hall of St. Mary's shelter, her Louboutin heels clicking against the worn floorboards. The building had been quietly evacuated, all except for the small group she believed was hiding in the basement. Behind her, medical personnel wheeled in equipment that would help sell her story of Alexander's mental breakdown. All exits covered, she asked Mark, who fell into step beside her. Yes, ma'am, they're trapped, though we haven't located the Chen woman or the boy yet. Victoria smiled. They'll show themselves. People like that can't resist playing hero. She gestured to the news vans visible through the windows. Is everything arranged with the media? Channel 8 is here in force. Others are arriving. Perfect. They'll witness the tragic culmination of Alexander Morgan's descent into paranoid delusion. Such a shame that his conspiracy theories about his devoted wife led to this very public breakdown. She checked her phone. 12:01 a.m. Right on schedule, breaking news alerts began appearing. Morgan Enterprises CEO Alexander Morgan missing. Sources suggest mental health crisis. Victoria allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as the lights went out. For a split second, the building was plunged into total darkness. Then emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. But something was wrong. The emergency system wasn't following the standard pattern. Instead, specific areas were being illuminated, creating a path through the building. Victoria's phone buzzed. She expected it to be Mark with an explanation for the power failure. Instead, she found herself staring at a live news feed. Her own face looked back at her, not from the present, but from security footage taken in her office. Hours earlier, she heard her own voice clearly. The best way to bury a story, Mark, is to control how it's told. Her blood ran cold as she realized what she was watching. The footage continued, showing her discussing Alexander's final dose, revealing her connection to Catherine Sullivan's disappearance, outlining her entire plan. Find that broadcast source, she snapped at Mark. Now! But more phones were lighting up around her as the same footage began playing across every major news network simultaneously. The carefully crafted narrative she had prepared was being shattered in real time. Victoria. Alexander's voice echoed through the building, seemingly coming from everywhere at once. He sounded nothing like the confused, medicated man she had cultivated over the past months. You taught me well, his voice continued, about contingency plans, about controlling the narrative, about watching from the shadows. Movement caught her eye. Through the windows she could see more news vans arriving, but these weren't the carefully selected media outlets she had arranged. These were investigative journalists, some from international networks. Shut down their signals, she ordered, but Mark was staring at his phone in horror. It's not just... Here, he said. It's everywhere, every network, every platform, and there's more. As if on cue, a new set of emergency lights illuminated the building's main chapel. Through its open doors, Victoria could see a display she had never intended for public viewing. Boards covered with evidence, photographs, documents, all meticulously outlining her systematic takeover of companies through manipulation and carefully administered drugs. And at the center of it all, a portrait she had thought long buried, Catherine Sullivan, Tommy's mother, the first person to come close to exposing her methods. Your mistake, Alexander's voice echoed again, was underestimating how many allies the truth would find, how many people would risk everything to expose what you've done. Victoria spun around, trying to locate the source of his voice. Her perfect composure was cracking. Find them, she screamed at her security team. Turn this building upside down. But as her men moved to comply, something else began happening. From every corner of the shelter, people emerged. Shelter volunteers, Morgan Enterprises employees, all holding phones broadcasting her own incriminating words. Did you really think Sarah Chen disappeared that night you sent your men after her? Alexander's voice was closer now. That Robert Hayes hadn't already secured copies of every file? That? Tommy had only been watching from the air vents. Victoria reached for her phone to call in her remaining forces, but the screen showed only one image, her own security footage, playing on an endless loop, confessing to every crime she had committed. And then, in a moment of perfect theatrical timing, the main doors of the shelter burst open. Federal agents moved in, led by a very much alive and free Robert Hayes. Behind them came news crews, their cameras capturing every moment of Victoria Morgan's unraveling. But it was the small figure standing in the doorway that finally shattered her composure. Tommy Sullivan stepped into the light, holding his mother's journal in one hand and Victoria's own notebook in the other. Looking for this? He asked, holding up her notebook. You should find better hiding places than the false bottom in your desk drawer. Victoria lunged for the boy, but strong hands grabbed her arms. She turned to find her own security chief, Mark, holding her back. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Morgan," he said, not sounding sorry at all, "but some of us still have a conscience." As federal agents moved in with handcuffs, Victoria caught a glimpse of her reflection in a window. Her perfect mask had finally cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. And somewhere in the building, cameras were rolling, capturing every moment of her downfall. The game she thought she was controlling had just revealed its true players. And as midnight stretched into the early hours of the morning, Victoria Morgan was about to learn the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the most dangerous prey are the ones you thought you had already trapped. The main hall of St. Mary's Shelter had transformed into an impromptu command center. Federal agents moved efficiently through the space, collecting evidence and conducting interviews. News crews jostled for position, their cameras capturing every moment of the unfolding story. At the center of it all, Alexander Morgan stood with Tommy and Sarah Chen, watching as Victoria was led to a secure vehicle. "This isn't over," Victoria called over her shoulder, her composure cracking further. "You have no idea how deep this goes, how many people are involved." Alexander stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the hall. "Actually, we do." He held up a small device, the recording bug from her office. "Every meeting, every phone call, every name. You never realized your own security chief was working with us for the past month." Mark stepped forward, removing his badge. "After what happened to Catherine Sullivan, I couldn't let it continue. Some of us actually have a conscience." Victoria's face contorted with rage, but before she could respond, Sister Margaret emerged from the crowd. "Perhaps, Mrs. Morgan, here it's time to consider the virtue of confession. Your own notebook tells quite a story." Tommy held up the damning evidence, Victoria's detailed record of her crimes. "My mom kept notes too. That's how you found her, isn't it?" "But you didn't find all of them." Sarah moved to a laptop connected to the large display screens that had been set up. "We've been tracking your network for months. Every shell company, every bribed official, every doctor who helped you create your special medications." She began displaying documents, each one adding another piece to the puzzle of Victoria's criminal empire. "The pharmaceutical company that supplied your custom drugs," Alexander continued. "They're being raided as we speak. Dr. Harrison and his team are already in custody. They're quite eager to make deals." Victoria's perfectly maintained facade finally crumbled completely. "You don't understand," she snarled. "Everything I did for power, for control. You were all so weak, so easily manipulated. I deserved to win." "No one deserves to win through cruelty and deception," Tommy said, his young voice carrying a wisdom beyond his years. "My mom taught me that." A commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. Through the doors came another group of federal agents, escorting a familiar figure, Claire, Victoria's fake assistant, now in handcuffs. "She's talking," one of the agents reported. "Everything about Catherine Sullivan, about the other companies, about the entire operation." Victoria lunged against her restraints, all pretense of sophistication gone. "You promised loyalty," she screamed at Claire. "I paid you enough." "Money can't buy real loyalty," Alexander said quietly. "That's something you never understood." Sarah stepped forward, holding up a file. "This is why Catherine Sullivan was targeted, isn't it? She found the pattern, how you moved from company to company, using the same methods each time. The suspicious medications, the gradual takeover, the orchestrated accidents." "She was going to expose everything," Tommy added, his voice thick with emotion. "But she made sure the evidence would survive, even if she didn't." Victoria's eyes darted around the room, perhaps finally realizing how completely her carefully constructed world had collapsed. Federal agents were boxing up evidence, journalists were broadcasting live, and her network of conspirators was unraveling by the minute. "Take her," the lead federal agent ordered. As Victoria was led away, she locked eyes with Alexander one last time. "I still win," she spat. "Your company, your reputation, it's all tainted now. Everything you built will crumble." But Alexander simply smiled. "No, Victoria. What you never understood is that real success isn't built on deception. Morgan Enterprises will survive because it was built on something stronger. integrity, and trust. As the door closed behind Victoria, Tommy turned to Alexander. "What happens now?" "Now?" Alexander placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Now we make sure this never happens to anyone else. Your mother's story and all the others, they'll be heard." Sarah was already coordinating with the journalists, ensuring the full story would be told. Sister Margaret moved through the crowd, offering comfort and support to those giving statements to the authorities. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over the city. A new day was beginning, and with it, the long process of healing and justice could finally start. But for Alexander Morgan, there was one more piece of unfinished business. He turned to Tommy, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "Your mother was a hero," he said softly, "and I made a promise to myself when I learned the truth. Would you and your brother like to come live with me? There's plenty of room, and I think your mother would want you to have a real home again." Tommy's eyes filled with tears as he looked up at the man his mother had tried to protect. Behind them, Michael emerged from the crowd, joining his brother. The sun rose higher, its light streaming through the shelter's windows, illuminating a scene of truth triumphant over deception, of justice finally served, of a family beginning to heal. 1 month later, the boardroom of Morgan Enterprises hummed with activity. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating a very different scene from the tense meetings of the past. Alexander Morgan sat at the head of the table, clear-eyed and focused, while Sarah Chen presented the company's restructuring plan. "The transition team has completed their audit," Sarah reported, gesturing to the screens displaying complex financial data. "All of Victoria's hidden accounts have been traced and frozen. The funds will be used to compensate her victims and their families." Robert Hayes, now reinstated as head of legal, nodded in approval. "The federal investigation has identified every company she targeted. Prosecution teams are building cases that will ensure she and her conspirators face justice." Alexander studied the faces around the table. Some were new, brought in to replace those who had been part of Victoria's network. Others were familiar, people who had helped expose the truth. All shared a commitment to rebuilding the company's integrity. "And what of Dr. Harrison's clinic?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Closed permanently," Sarah confirmed. "The FBI's forensics team found evidence of their pharmaceutical manipulation going back years. They're cooperating fully in exchange for reduced sentences." A soft knock at the door interrupted the meeting. Sister Margaret entered, accompanied by Tommy and Michael. The boys were transformed from their days on the street, clean, well-dressed, though Tommy still maintained his talent for moving quietly when he wanted to. "Sorry to interrupt," Sister Margaret smiled, "but the foundation papers are ready for your signature, Mr. Morgan." Alexander stood, welcoming them in. "Not an interruption at all, this is perfect timing." He turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present the first initiative of our company's new direction." Sarah pulled up a new presentation. On the screens, the logo appeared. The Catherine Sullivan Foundation for Corporate Ethics and Whistleblower Protection. "Using the recovered funds from Victoria's accounts," Alexander explained, "we're establishing a foundation dedicated to preventing corporate fraud and protecting those who speak up against corruption. Sister Margaret has agreed to serve on the board of directors, bringing her years of experience in helping society's most vulnerable." Tommy stepped forward, his voice clear and confident. "The foundation will also fund programs at St. Mary's Shelter, helping kids who don't have anywhere else to go," Michael added, "and we're setting up a scholarship program in our mom's name for kids who want to study business ethics and corporate responsibility." The board members nodded in approval. This was more than just damage control. It was a genuine attempt to create positive change from the ashes of Victoria's crimes. "There's one more announcement," Alexander said, placing a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "As of this morning, the adoption is official. Tommy and Michael Sullivan Morgan are legally part of my family." Sister Margaret wiped a tear from her eye as the boardroom erupted in applause. Sarah watched the scene with satisfaction, remembering the dark days when she had feared the truth would never come to light. The meeting concluded with a sense of hope and purpose. As the board members filed out, many stopped to greet Tommy and Michael. no longer seeing them as street kids but as symbols of resilience and courage. Alexander lingered in the boardroom with his new sons, Sarah and sister Margaret. Through the windows they could see the city stretching out before them, the same view he had stared at months ago when Tommy's warning had first pierced through Victoria's web of lies. "Your mother would be proud," he told the boys softly. "Not just of what you did, but of who you are." Tommy touched the small locket he wore, a gift from Alexander containing a photo of his mother. "She always said the truth was like light. You couldn't keep it buried forever." Sarah checked her phone, smiling at a news alert. Victoria's plea deal was rejected. The prosecutor says they have enough evidence for a full trial. "Good," Michael said firmly. "People should know what she did. All of it." Sister Margaret placed a gentle hand on each boy's shoulder. "From darkness God often brings light, and from your mother's sacrifice much good will now come." Alexander looked around at this unlikely family, brought together by tragedy but united by courage and truth. The company would recover, stronger than before. Victoria's victims would find justice, and two boys who had lost everything had found a new home. "Ready for lunch?" he asked Tommy and Michael. "I think we have something to celebrate today." As they headed for the elevator, Tommy paused by the window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, other corporate predators might be spinning their webs of deception, but now there was a foundation dedicated to stopping them, a safe haven for whistleblowers, and a powerful company committed to ethical business practices. The truth had finally set them all free. 3 months after Victoria's arrest, the Catherine Sullivan Foundation's first major conference filled the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. Corporate executives, ethics officers, and whistleblower protection advocates from around the world gathered to discuss the future of business integrity. Sarah Chen stood at the podium, her voice clear and passionate as she addressed the packed room. "Corporate predators succeed because they count on our silence. They depend on fear, on isolation, on the belief that one person can't make a difference." She gestured to the screen behind her, where photographs of Victoria's victims appeared. "But as we've learned, the truth has a way of finding allies." In the front row, Alexander Morgan sat with Tommy and Michael, all three dressed in matching suits. The boys had adapted remarkably to their new life, though Tommy still occasionally used his stealth skills to explore the ventilation system at Morgan Enterprises, now with his father's amused permission, as long as he didn't disrupt any meetings. "The foundation isn't just about preventing corporate crime," Sarah continued. "It's about creating a network of support for those brave enough to speak up. Every major company now has a direct line to our whistleblower protection program, managed by people who understand the risks because they've faced them themselves." Robert Hayes, seated nearby with Sister Margaret, nodded in approval. The legal framework they'd developed was already being adopted as an industry standard, with Morgan Enterprises leading by example. After the presentation, during the reception, Tommy found himself surrounded by admirers. Corporate security experts were particularly interested in his insights about building surveillance blind spots, knowledge that was now being used to protect companies rather than infiltrate them. "Your mother would be amazed," Sister Margaret told him, watching as he explained his observations to a group of attentive executives. "She started this fight alone, but look at the army of allies she inspired." Michael, who had been chatting with a group of young business ethics students, joined them. "The scholarship program is expanding," he reported proudly. 10 more universities signed up today." Alexander wrapped an arm around each boy's shoulders. "And that's just the beginning. The Foundation's influence is spreading faster than we anticipated." Sarah approached their group, accompanied by Jack Thompson from Channel 8 News. "The documentary is ready," she announced. "They want to premiere it next month." "The whole story?" Tommy asked, his expression serious. Jack nodded. "Everything. Victoria's entire operation, your mother's investigation, how a bunch of unlikely heroes brought down one of the biggest corporate conspiracies in history." He smiled at the boy. "Though we kept your surveillance techniques a bit vague, don't want to give away all your secrets." The mention of secrets reminded Alexander of the letter that had arrived that morning from Victoria's maximum security prison. He hadn't opened it yet, unsure if he wanted to hear whatever manipulations or threats it might contain. Tommy, perceptive as always, noticed his preoccupation. "You don't have to read it," he said quietly. "She doesn't have any power over us anymore." Alexander squeezed his shoulder gratefully. "You're right, some chapters are better left closed." Across the ballroom, Claire, Victoria's former assistant turned state's witness, was providing testimony to a panel of corporate security experts. Her insights into how Victoria had infiltrated and manipulated companies were proving invaluable in preventing similar schemes. "It's strange," Michael mused, watching her, "how many people she fooled for so long." "That's why the Foundation's work is so important," Sarah replied. "We're not just protecting whistleblowers, we're teaching people to recognize the warning signs before it's too late." Sister Margaret excused herself to speak with a group of shelter directors who had come to learn about implementing similar protection programs in their facilities. The network of safe havens was growing, ensuring that future whistleblowers would always have somewhere to turn. As the evening drew to a close, Alexander found himself back at the podium looking out over the assembled crowd. These were the people who would carry forward the lessons learned from Victoria's crimes, who would help ensure that corporate predators could never again operate with impunity. 3 months ago, he began, a boy's courage to speak the truth changed everything. He reminded us that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one society least expects to hear. He smiled at Tommy and Michael. Today, we're all choosing to be that voice, to stand up, to speak out, to protect those who risk everything to expose corruption. The audience applauded, but Alexander wasn't finished. The Catherine Sullivan Foundation isn't just an organization. It's a promise to my sons, to their mother's memory, to every person who's ever faced the choice between comfortable silence and dangerous truth. We stand with you. You are not alone. As the applause swelled, Tommy felt tears in his eyes. His mother's fight had seemed so solitary, so hopeless. But now her legacy was changing the world. One company, one whistleblower, one truth at a time. The sun set over the city skyline, casting long shadows through the ballroom windows. But unlike the shadows Victoria had used to hide her crimes, these were being filled with light. The light of truth, of justice, of hope for a future where corporate integrity wasn't just a phrase, but a reality worth fighting for. The Sullivan-Morgan family gathered in the cozy living room of their penthouse apartment, surrounded by the warm glow of evening light. It was a special night, exactly 1 year since Tommy's warning had set in motion the events that would change all their lives. "I think it's time," Alexander said, reaching for the envelope he'd kept sealed in his desk for the past 9 months. Victoria's prison letter had remained unopened, a reminder of the past they'd chosen to leave behind. Tommy and Michael exchanged glances. "Are you sure?" Michael asked. Alexander nodded. "Whatever she wrote, it can't hurt us anymore, and maybe we need this closure." Sarah and Sister Margaret, who had joined them for this family moment, watched as Alexander carefully opened the envelope. The letter inside was written in Victoria's elegant hand, but the words were anything but refined. "My empire will rise again," he read aloud, his voice steady. "Others will continue my work. You haven't won." He stopped, looking at the faces around him. "It goes on like that. Threats, delusions, promises of revenge." Tommy took the letter, studying it. "She still doesn't understand, does she? That it was never about winning or losing." "No," Sarah agreed. "She never understood that real power comes from building people up, not tearing them down." Sister Margaret reached for the letter and with deliberate ceremony fed it into the fireplace. They watched in silence as Victoria's final threats turned to ash. "Speaking of building people up," Alexander smiled, producing another envelope, this one bearing the Morgan Enterprises logo. "The board approved our new initiative today." Inside was a proposal for an expansion of the Catherine Sullivan Foundation's work. The company would be partnering with universities to create a comprehensive business ethics curriculum, mandatory for all corporate leadership programs. "Mom would have loved this," Michael said softly, reading through the details. teaching the next generation how to lead with integrity. Tommy, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "I had another dream about her last night." His voice was thoughtful. She was smiling, standing in the sunlight. No more shadows. Alexander pulled both boys close. The past year had been a journey of healing for all of them. Tommy and Michael had flourished in their new home, excelling at school while maintaining their commitment to helping others. Tommy still volunteered at St. Mary's, teaching other street kids that they too had value, that their voices mattered. Sarah shuffled through some papers she'd brought. The Foundation's latest report shows we've helped expose 3 major corporate fraud attempts this year. Victoria's old network is completely dismantled. "And the shelter network is thriving," Sister Margaret added. "We've opened 15 new safe houses for whistleblowers and their families." The conversation was interrupted by the evening news. Jack Thompson's familiar face appeared on the screen, standing outside the federal courthouse. "In a historic verdict today," he reported, "Victoria Morgan and her conspirators were sentenced for their roles in one of the largest corporate fraud schemes ever uncovered. But the real story isn't about their crimes. It's about the unlikely heroes who brought them to justice." The screen showed footage from that night at St. Mary's, when truth had finally triumphed over deception. But it also showed what had come after: the Foundation's work, the lives saved, the changes implemented across the corporate world. "Sometimes," Alexander mused, "the worst things in our lives lead to the best changes." Tommy stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. From this height he could see St. Mary's shelter, its windows warmly lit, offering sanctuary to those in need. He could see the Morgan Enterprises building, now a beacon of corporate integrity. And somewhere out there he knew other children were finding their voices, other whistleblowers were choosing truth over silence. "Dad?" he said, the word still new and precious on his tongue. "I think I know what I want to do when I grow up." Alexander joined him at the window. "Oh?" "I want to help run the Foundation. Keep helping people like Mom tried to do." Michael stood on Tommy's other side. "We both do. It's our legacy too, isn't it?" Alexander looked at his sons, these remarkable boys who had taught him so much about courage, about truth, about what really mattered in life. "It's all of our legacy now." As they stood together watching the city below, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Tommy smiled, remembering something his mother used to say: "Truth is like starlight. It travels through darkness to reach us, but once it arrives, it changes everything it touches." The Catherine Sullivan Foundation's light was spreading, touching lives, changing the corporate world one truth at a time. And in that light, a family forged by courage and conviction looked toward the future with hope. After all, sometimes the most powerful changes start with a single voice willing to speak the truth. Tommy had proved that a year ago, and now countless others were following in his footsteps, ensuring that no corporate predator would ever again operate unchallenged in the shadows. 2 years to the day after Tommy's warning had echoed through Morgan Enterprises, the Catherine Sullivan Memorial Library opened its doors. The gleaming building, attached to the Foundation's new headquarters, stood as a testament to how far they'd come. "Every document here tells a story," Sarah Chen explained to the gathered crowd at the dedication ceremony. "Not just about corporate fraud, but about the courage of those who stood against it." She gestured to the wall behind her, where Catherine Sullivan's portrait hung alongside photographs of other whistleblowers who had risked everything for the truth. Tommy, now 14, and notably taller, stood at the podium next to her. The shy street boy had grown into a confident young man, though he still maintained that uncanny ability to move silently when he wanted to. "My mom used to say that knowledge was the most powerful weapon against corruption," he addressed the audience, his voice clear and strong. "This library isn't just about storing documents, it's about empowering people with the information they need to recognize and resist corporate predators." The library's main hall housed an extensive collection of case studies, legal resources, and educational materials. But its most important feature was the secure digital network, connecting whistleblowers with protection services worldwide. Alexander watched his son with pride. Both Tommy and Michael had thrown themselves into the foundation's work, each finding their own way to honor their mother's memory. While Tommy focused on developing better protection systems for whistleblowers, Michael had become passionate about educational outreach, speaking at schools about ethical leadership. Sister Margaret, who had become a permanent board member of the foundation, stepped forward to bless the new building. "May this place be a sanctuary for truth seekers," she intoned, "and a light in the darkness for those who choose courage over comfort." After the ceremony, as guests toured the facility, Alexander found Tommy standing in front of his mother's portrait. "She would have loved this," Tommy said softly. "Not just the library, but everything we've built. The network, the protection programs, the education initiatives." Alexander placed a hand on his shoulder. "She started this fight alone, but look at the army of allies she inspired." Sarah joined them, carrying a thick folder. "The latest impact report," she explained, 23 major corporate fraud attempts prevented this year alone, over 100 whistleblowers and their families protected. Thousands of students reached through our ethics programs." "And Victoria?" Tommy asked, though they all knew the answer. "Still serving her sentence," Sarah confirmed. "Her appeals were denied last month. Her network is completely dismantled." Robert Hayes approached, accompanied by Jack Thompson. The journalist had become a strong ally, his investigative reporting helping to expose several corporate schemes before they could fully develop. "The documentary series is being used in business schools worldwide," Jack reported. "Students are actually requesting more ethics courses, if you can believe it." Robert nodded in approval. "The legal framework we developed has been adopted by corporations in 12 countries now. The Sullivan Standards are becoming the global benchmark for corporate integrity." Tommy smiled at this, remembering how his mother had dreamed of creating lasting change. The standards named in her honor were protecting countless people from the kind of predatory schemes that had claimed her life. As the evening proceeded, Alexander watched his sons working the room with natural grace. Michael was deep in conversation with a group of international business students, while Tommy demonstrated the library's secure communication systems to corporate security experts. Sarah appeared at his side, her expression thoughtful. "Remember when we thought we were just trying to save one company?" Alexander chuckled. "And now look at what it's become." The Catherine Sullivan Foundation had grown beyond anything they'd imagined. Its network of safe houses, legal resources, and educational programs was changing the landscape of corporate governance. The predators who had once operated with impunity found themselves facing an organized, vigilant opposition. As the sun set, its light streamed through the library's windows, illuminating the words carved above the entrance. "Truth fears no shadow." It was Catherine's favorite saying, one that had guided her investigation and now guided the Foundation's work. Tommy joined his father and Sarah, his young face serious. "I found something in Mom's old files," he said, pulling out a worn notebook. "It's like she knew somehow that this would all happen." The final entry, dated just days before her disappearance, read, "If anything happens to me, remember, the truth doesn't die with one person. It lives in every voice brave enough to speak up, in every heart strong enough to stand firm. My work is just the beginning." And as they stood there, surrounded by the legacy of one woman's courage, they knew she had been right. Her work was just the beginning, and its light would continue to shine, illuminating the path for truth seekers yet to come. 5 years after Victoria's arrest, Morgan Enterprises' annual ethics conference had become the most prestigious event in the corporate world. CEOs, government officials, and business leaders from around the globe gathered to discuss the future of ethical leadership. But this year was special. It marked Tommy Sullivan Morgan's first keynote speech. At 18, Tommy stood at the podium with the same quiet confidence that had allowed him to navigate corporate ventilation systems as a child. The audience fell silent as he began to speak. 5 years ago, I was a street kid who happened to overhear something I wasn't supposed to hear, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. Today, I'm here to tell you about what happens when we create systems that encourage people to speak up rather than stay silent. Michael, now 21 and studying business ethics at university, watched from the front row alongside Alexander and Sarah. His brother had grown into a powerful advocate for corporate transparency, combining his natural stealth abilities with technology to develop cutting-edge whistleblower protection systems. The old way of doing business relied on shadows, Tommy continued, on the belief that what happens in boardrooms stays in boardrooms. But the Sullivan standards have proven that transparency isn't just ethical, it's good business. He gestured to the screens behind him, where data showed the dramatic decrease in corporate fraud since the implementation of their programs. Companies that adopted the Sullivan standards showed increased profitability, employee satisfaction, and public trust. My mother believed that one person speaking the truth could change everything, Tommy said, his voice softening. But what she couldn't have known was how many people were waiting for someone to take that first step. Sarah wiped a tear from her eye, remembering the frightened boy who had burst into Alexander's office 5 years ago. Now he was leading the next phase of their mission, developing AI systems that could detect patterns of corporate manipulation before they fully developed. After the speech, during the reception, Michael proudly showed Tommy his latest project, a university curriculum that would make ethics training mandatory for all business degrees. We're starting with 10 schools, he explained, but there's interest from universities worldwide. Sister Margaret, now retired but still active on the foundation's board, joined them. Your mother would be so proud, she told the brothers, not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become. Alexander watched his sons interact with the conference attendees, marveling at how naturally they had stepped into their roles as leaders of the next generation. Tommy's security innovations were revolutionizing whistleblower protection, while Michael's educational initiatives were changing how future business leaders viewed corporate responsibility. Sarah approached with Jack Thompson, who had continued to be a vital ally in their work. The new documentary series is ready, Jack announced, following 5 young whistleblowers as they navigate the process of exposing corporate fraud, all safely, thanks to your protection programs. And Victoria? Alexander asked, though he already knew the answer. Still claiming she'll make a comeback, Sarah replied, but her latest appeal was denied. The systems we've put in place make it impossible for anyone to operate the way she did. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. A group of international business students had arrived, the first graduates of the Sullivan Scholars Program, which provided full scholarships to students committed to ethical business practices. Tommy excused himself to greet them, and Alexander noticed how the students' eyes lit up with admiration. His son had become something of a legend in corporate ethics circles, the street boy who had exposed one of the biggest corporate conspiracies in history. Michael joined the group, explaining their latest initiative, a global network of ethics, officers sharing real-time information about potential corporate threats. We're not just reacting to fraud anymore, he explained. We are preventing it before it starts. As the evening progressed, Alexander found himself in conversation with a young CEO whose company had recently adopted the Sullivan standards. It's remarkable, she said, how much has changed in just 5 years. The old ways of doing business, the backroom deals, the covered-up scandals, they're becoming impossible to maintain. Because people aren't afraid to speak up anymore, Alexander replied. They know they'll be protected, supported, heard. Later, as the conference wound down, the Sullivan-Morgan family gathered in Alexander's office. The city lights sparkled below them, but the view was different now. Where once there had been shadows, there was transparency. Where there had been fear, there was courage. Tommy stood at the window just as he had so many times before. You know what I realized today? He said thoughtfully. We're not just carrying on Mum's legacy anymore, we're creating our own. Michael nodded. The Sullivan standards, the protection networks, the education programs, they're bigger than any one person now. Alexander looked at his sons with pride. They had taken their mother's dream of corporate integrity and transformed it into a global movement. The truth she had fought for had indeed found its army of allies, and somewhere he knew Catherine Sullivan was smiling, watching her boys lead the next generation of truth seekers into the light.